Why does Trump want Greenland, going as far as to say he will use military force to take it? Why is Trump insisting on taking Canada, Greenland, the Panama Canal? Is it simply a pressure tactic for trade negotiations and tariffs, or does it make economic and strategic sense for the US to govern these regions officially? What's my views on Trump's speeches to annex Greenland, Canada, the Panama Canal, and change the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America? Is Trump actually going to do it? Both France and Germany have threatened the US with repercussions if the US tries to take Greenland by force. Do you think they're allowed to go against the US? What consequences would both countries face for their actions? All right, okay, we get it. Okay, everyone's interested in knowing what's going on. Is Trump serious? Is he actually planning to annex Greenland, Canada, the Panama Canal, even Mexico, like some people are suggesting? Is he serious? Can he do it? Is the US capable of doing this? And will they face any repercussions if they try and do that? And has Trump said that he will use military force? So first of all, when he was asked this question in a press conference, whether he would be willing, whether he will deny the use of military force, using military force, he said, no, I will not rule it out. I will not rule it out. So he's not said that he will use military force. He has said that he will not rule out the use of military force to achieve his objectives. Okay. So all of that. So what's going on? So Trump has made it very clear that he considers Canada the 51st state of the United States. He taunted Justin Trudeau while he was still prime minister by calling him the governor of the great state of Canada. So he has said that he will annex Canada. And he said that he will use economic force rather than military force to annex Canada. When it comes to Greenland, he's very, very serious about it. When it comes to the Panama Canal, he's going back into the older chapters of history, and he has pointed out that this canal was actually an American canal. The Americans paid for it, and then it was handed over to the nation of Panama somewhere in the late 1960s or thereabouts. So the US paid for the thing. It was supposed to be US territory, and that's what the two governments had agreed to. And then Jimmy Carter, I believe, or whoever it was, I don't remember who it was, handed over this canal to Panama after there was a US mediated coup in Panama, which brought a pro-US government to power, and then they handed it over to Panama. So, what's Trump trying to do, and is this all possible? And where does it fit in vis-a-vis the grand geopolitical scheme of things? So, Trump is serious. I'm not sure whether he wants to actually do all of this: Canada, Panama Canal, Mexico, Greenland, all of that, or maybe he's just after a couple of things, like maybe Greenland and Panama, and maybe he's just putting Canada also on the platter, just to make people worry about Canada, and while he's actually trying to achieve his bigger objectives. Or maybe he wants Canada as well. At the end of the day, the US can do whatever it wants. All of these territories are essentially under US control, directly or indirectly. Denmark is a small little nation. They have a very tenuous hold on Greenland. The US can just walk in, and there's nothing Denmark can do about it. Canada, well, what can Canada do about this? Canada, there's nothing they can do about it. And apparently their economy is being subsidized to the tune of, I don't know how many billions of dollars every year by the Americans. So without the American help, they would collapse. So there's that. And the US, like Trump said, can use economic pressure to induce Canada to merge with the US. When it comes to the Panama Canal, the US can do it. Of course they can do it. There's nothing Panama can do to prevent the US from taking over the canal. So what will eventually happen, most likely, is that the US will give some token amount of money, some token payment to each country, a few $1 billion here and there. Maybe they'll give $10 billion or something, I'm just guessing, to Panama for the canal. Maybe they'll give a few $1 billion to Denmark for Greenland, and Canada, there's nothing they'll give them. They'll just make them part of their territory. So why would you do this? Why would Trump want to do this? Why does the US need so much more territory? Isn't it a headache to govern all this? Or maybe the cost benefit ratio, it is skewed in the direction of the benefits rather than cost. So there's more benefit than cost, maybe. What could it be like? So let's take a look at the map, and that perhaps will help us understand what's going on. Everything in geopolitics boils down to the map. So here's the map of the world. We go to the Western Hemisphere. Here you have the US. So he's talking about Canada, which is a gigantic country, larger than the US. He's talking about the Panama Canal, which is over here, as you can see. We're zooming into it, right? That's where the Panama Canal is located. And then there's Greenland, which is this large, frozen, apparent wasteland. Now, here's the deal. Greenland is rich in natural resources: oil, gas, coal, metals, whatnot. And so that's why it makes a lot of sense for the US to acquire this territory from Denmark. Denmark has a very small presence in Greenland. They have a very tenuous historical claim to it. It's mostly been a self governing and mostly ungoverned territory. It's mostly empty, it's all frozen glaciers. So there is that. Then Canada is an extremely large, extremely resource rich territory. If the US acquires Canada plus Greenland, they will have a territory that is larger than that of Russia. Do you understand? Russia is currently the largest nation in the world. If the Americans acquire Greenland plus Canada, they will have access to the natural resources of an entire continent, and the territory they will own will be larger than that of Russia. And there will be a primary player in the Arctic Ocean region, the Arctic Circle region, which, because of climate change, because of global warming, is slowly thawing up. And there's a lot of resources to be found under the ocean and in this overall region, the Arctic Ocean region. And right now, Russia is the major player here, and Canada. Well, Canada is hardly a player, but it controls a lot of Arctic territory because it owns the territory. So, with the US acquiring Canada and Greenland, they will become probably a more major player than Russia. They'll maybe bump Russia to number two when it comes to the Arctic Great Game. So that is the reason why the Americans are going for Canada and Greenland, and they will most likely acquire these two territories within a few years before Trump demits office. And when it comes to Panama, the Panama Canal, well, it's an extraordinarily important geopolitical, geographical choke point in the world. It's one of the major choke points, like the Suez Canal, the Malacca Strait, and much more. The Bab al Mandeb Strait, the Strait of Hormuz, and the Panama Canal. So a very very large portion of maritime traffic passes through the Panama Canal, and whoever controls it controls essentially global trade to a very large extent. So it makes sense for the Americans to control this and not leave it to Panama, which kind of is a US proxy, but why not control it ourselves entirely, directly, without the need for for going through a third party. So the Americans manufactured the canal, they constructed the canal, they paid for the whole thing, and then they gave it to Panama. So now it makes sense for them to take it back. So once again, if the Americans decide to do this, it can happen tomorrow. So a lot of geopolitical change is coming up. I believe Trump is very serious when he says he wants to do this. And it makes a lot of sense for the US in this very rapidly changing geopolitical climate to acquire these territories and take direct control and ownership of these territories without having to go through intermediaries like the Canadian Prime Minister, the Danish government, whatever. They'll just walk in and take over. So it will need some reorganization of the US. I mean, Canada has multiple states, Alberta, Saskatchewan, British Columbia, Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec, Newfoundland and Labrador, and the Northwest Territories, Yukon, Nunavut, and so on. So will each of these territories of Canadian provinces become a US state, or will Canada overall become a US possession the way Puerto Rico is? So all that needs to be seen. It remains to be seen, but I think it's a matter of time before the Americans take over Canada and Greenland. I'll be surprised if they don't take Canada. Greenland is essentially just you just need a signature on paper from Trump for that to happen, and so with Panama. Canada will maybe a little more delicate operation, but it too, from my perspective, will happen. So that's how I see this happening. Now let's come back to the questions. Um, does it make economic and strategic sense for the US to govern these regions officially? Yes, it does make a lot of sense for them to govern these regions directly. Some of it could be a pressure tactic, but what's the point of threatening to take over Canada? I mean, who are you pressurizing by doing that? You're not really pressurizing anybody. Uh, so I think it could happen within the next 4 years, and that's going to be very interesting. It'll totally recalibrate, reconfigure the geopolitical chessboard.